Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about trust after assault. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Molly Kennedy. Molly uses she, her pronouns and is the current VSC volunteer involved in outreach, education, and other groups there. She graduated from the University of Florida in December of 2018 and will be attending medical school this upcoming August. So thank you so much, Molly, for joining us today.
Hey, guys.
And I also have returning Kevin Fox. Kevin uses he, him pronouns and is a victim advocate in an adjunct position with the VSC and Zebra Coalition serving survivors in the LGBTQ community. Kevin worked as a high school teacher while receiving his Master of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Rollins College. He has worked with adolescents with substance use issues, Equality Florida for LGBTQ rights, and in the UF Health Cancer Center at Orlando Health Counseling and performing therapy with cancer patients and their families. His passion when working with clients is to help them increase their resilience and satisfaction with their everyday lives. He seeks to help clients increase their meaning from life and live more authentically and honestly. So thank you so much, Kevin, for coming back on once again to the podcast.
Of course, I'm always happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you today. As a brief introduction, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is a time to uplift and highlight this issue and talk about ways we can support survivors and end sexual violence. So during this month, we will be releasing podcasts highlighting voices of survivors and their healing journeys, as well as advocating for victims' rights and ways we can all do our part in preventing violence. On this episode, we will be talking about common reactions survivors have in regards to trust after assault, how this can affect relationships and dating, as well as other ripple effects it can have, how supporters can be a trusting and safe person for the survivors in their lives, and possible ways survivors can move towards regaining trust. So with that, I'd like to just start off. How would you personally define trust?
Trust to me is just that feeling that you're safe with someone, like innately, like that while they might make a human mistake at some point, say something they didn't mean, whatever, hurt your feelings, that at the core, they have your back and they have your safety and your well-being in mind. I kind of think of it beyond just like, in high school, like, can you trust someone with this secret? And that's a part of trust, but I think the deeper part of trust is knowing that you feel safe with someone.
Yeah, I kind of answer that the same way. I find this to actually be kind of a hard question to answer because it's like, what exactly is trust? Is it a feeling? So I didn't know how to say this, but I kind of talked about it being a feeling that you can really reveal your true self to someone and know that they have your best interest in mind and they respect your boundaries and you can confide in them and count on that person in hard times is what I would say is trust.
I love both of those answers. I think that It is a really big question. I think that trust can probably feel different for different people. So I appreciate both of your viewpoints on it as we kind of delve into this topic. Um, I also appreciate that it could be like a feeling. Is it a feeling? Is it this? And I would argue that I think it can definitely be a feeling, and the idea of safety is really important when we talk about this particular topic. I wanted to also ask, after an assault occurs, after a sexual assault, how can trust with others change?
Yeah, that's such a broad question because there's so many factors. Like, was it someone they originally trusted versus a stranger? Was it a friend, a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, spouse of 20 years, family member? Like the dynamics at play are so vast that the answer is it can change literally in any way that you could imagine it changing, which doesn't help at all. But it's so like, how do I date again? How do I be with my family again? How do I disclose and know that I'll be supported and believed? All these questions kind of can arise depending on each person's situation with an assault.
Absolutely. I think that I can definitely see how, with everything as we're, talking about on these podcasts, it's all individual, it's all diverse and that kind of thing. So you brought up like with loved ones, for example, and sexual relationships as well. Do you think that trust can also change like with society and even strangers?
I think so. I can talk on that because I was assaulted by a stranger. I think after you're assaulted, trust with everyone changes. And then if it was a stranger, I know for me, I still don't know who assaulted me. So when I was in Gainesville, I'd, go to stores and people would look at me. And I'm like, is this a person that, assaulted me? I don't trust these people. And then when I would go to the library at night, walking home or going back to my scooter to get home, I was like running to my scooter because I didn't trust the people that were around me, even though they might have been good people and I had no idea about them. But it was just it's hard to trust yourself and other people after an assault. And another thing that develops after you're assaulted too is you have to you kind of get a new hurdle of trying to get over finding people to trust to tell about your assault. So it's not just like trust with other people, it's a new hurdle. Like, who do I trust to tell about this?
Definitely. And thank you for sharing your story and for sharing your experience, Molly. I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask Kevin specifically, have you ever seen your clients lose trust with people of the same gender as the abuser?
Oh, yes. Especially as a male advocate who, I'll meet clients in that immediate crisis where I'm going and they are assuming by the nature of what we do, knowing that sexual assault is not a women only issue, but it primarily does affect women. So a lot of times clients will say like, oh, for some reason I thought that there'd be a female counselor here. And so off the bat, sometimes I address like, I get it. I'm also not like a tiny person either. I'm like 6'2". I'm very broad shouldered. I'm like 215. Like I don't come across as, I see how I can come across as like intimidating to someone who doesn't know me quite yet, especially after just experiencing that trauma from someone who was a male. So I address that pretty often with clients, some of the trepidation and the anxiety and the trust that goes along with it. Or even when people just call the office for an appointment, I might be the one scheduling it. And then from time to time, they'll be like, but it's not with you, right? It'll be a female counselor. And I'm like, well, it can be, and I'll sometimes have that dialogue with them or even address it in that first session, because it is, especially for survivors who have experienced multiple assaults. And so the relationship with men, for example, may have been highly negative. Like they might not have known a good male figure for most of their lives. So part of the therapeutic process then can be really helpful in that it's a corrective emotional experience, like how to have a healthy male presence in one's life. But at the same time, I also, at VSC, we respect that if someone's like, I'm such in a crisis that this is far too much for me to work for a male for the next few months until I kind of get some of my anxiety together or get past some of this immediate crisis, then we'll of course refer to a female. But it's funny because another male advocate, myself, did a presentation on this kind of subject as male advocates. And we found long-term feedback is pretty good in having that corrective male experience. But at the same time, we're not saying it's better than a female counselor. We're not pushing it on anybody. But it was something to note that, like, in the end, it can be good just to face that anxiety. But I have clients all the time that are like, the biggest thing that they're frustrated about is sometimes they're a young adult and they want to date, but they're terrified of men. So it's like this hurdle to work through. A male employer, a male server at a restaurant, a male, your roommate's boyfriend is coming over and staying the night, and that gives you anxiety. Like, just all those little things that raise that anxiety and that feeling of re-traumatization.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing all of those points up. I was curious to know because, as you know, anyone could be a survivor of sexual assault regardless of gender, and anyone could be a perpetrator of sexual assault regardless of gender. And of course, a majority, though, of survivors identify as female and a majority of the abusers identify as male. So I was curious to know what it was like to be a male advocate, and you bringing up that one piece to it of a lot of survivors who have a hard time with men in their lives, essentially, after an assault, if the abuser was a man. I remember there's a book, Yes Means Yes, and I forget who the author was, but they said something like, after an assault, there's no difference between rape and getting in a car crash, except you are not afraid of cars, but instead half the human race. So I don't know if you're familiar with that quote, but that just kind of came to mind while you were talking. Do you have a story? And of course, in order to remain confidential, of course, do you have any kind of stories of kind of the healing journey of a survivor who at first was really hesitant to work with you because of your gender identity, as far as being a male advocate? And then at the end, they were like, you know what, I'm so glad that I did end up working with a male advocate.
Yeah, there's a handful for sure. I will say now, being the LGBT advocate, it kind of helps because they know they're meeting with someone who's within that community. So lately, some of that anxiety has lessened because they're like, oh, at least he's in the LGBT community. He's probably overcome some kind of adversity because of his orientation or his identity. And it has that bonding piece to it. It makes me feel safer to some clients knowing that in advance. But one story was a client I met pretty early on working at VSC. And I remember after speaking with them that night, and it was such a weird night because it was non-report to police, which, for those who don't know, we scheduled that one-on-one with the client to come get their exam done. And we had scheduled for a time, and then 2 law enforcement cases came in. So I kept having to push them back. And it was pretty late at night at this point. And the nurse was already there. And I went to meet with the client and escort them to our facility. And they said, like, oh, I guess I knew I was talking to you on the phone, but I didn't know if there would be like a female counselor here as well. And I was like, oh no, it's just me. Is that okay? They're like, yeah, that should be fine. And that whole night was great. And I remember them saying that one of the best things, at least about my presence, was addressing the gender and being, they described it as me being very disarming. Like, I was quickly very easy to talk to and easy to build that rapport. And then after a few sessions later, because they came for weekly counseling, was like, yeah, it was so funny because in that moment, and this person goes to the gym a lot, they've done self-defense classes. They're like, even you being the helping person in that moment, I was evaluating, like, could I take him down if I had to? Like, could I? Because they were like, you are much taller than I expected. You are much bigger. Like, so I was debating with myself, walking to this facility and it's 10:30 at night. Could I defend myself against this person if I had to? And now, like, I still see them and we have a great rapport and like we can laugh at those things. But that was a story of like that initial anxiety to someone who didn't have good male figures in their life that is now grateful. Like, I'm glad I was challenged by having a male because it was what this individual specifically needed to kind of address that and tackle it head on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is really good for anyone listening who might be a supporter of a survivor who is listening right now, because kind of addressing it and understanding like, hey, I want to respect your boundaries, and kind of just being upfront and knowledgeable about different reactions to trauma and how everyone reacts differently. And then kind of just knowing like, this isn't about me. I just want to make sure that you're, feeling safe. And I just want to address that. Um, we've been talking a little bit about how trauma can, like sexual assault, can affect a person's entire life, including their relationships. It can definitely have those ripple effects. So, given that, how can rape affect someone's trust in doctors and other professionals, such as law enforcement? And what can survivors do to advocate for themselves when searching out like gynecologists or communicating boundaries, things like that?
I think I can talk on this since I'm going to med school in a few months. It can be incredibly difficult for survivors of sexual assault to go to the physician's office because, going to the physician means sometimes getting undressed in front of another person or having a medical exam where someone's like touching different parts of your body. So it can definitely be a very intimidating process, and also interacting with physicians themselves can just be very intimidating. So I think, well, it affects trust with a physician because one, there have been physicians who can be abusers too. So that can be a scary experience. And also just like I said, going to get an exam or see a physician, there can be lots of things that are very uncomfortable, which can lead to, not being honest with your physician, which is never good. Having maybe an issue that you're afraid to show a physician, so it just gets worse and worse. And that's really bad for your health if you hide something. So I think to feel more powerful in the situations, it's important to research what physicians you're going to see. Search for physicians who are, trauma-informed physicians who know how to deal with patients who have dealt with trauma. Look up, if you have a certain illness, that you have, research about it. Like, so, the questions that you have, if you're getting a procedure done or a physical exam, also research it so that when you go into the physician's office, you play a part in your care. And so you know how the procedure is supposed to happen. So if something goes wrong or something isn't right, like I said, physicians can be abusers too. You can say, hey, I'm not really comfortable with what's happening right now. And, I've read about this procedure and this isn't what I expected. Can we talk about it? And just being honest with your physician so you can have a good relationship with them.
Definitely, Molly. And being someone who's getting into kind of the medical field, do you think that there's sometimes like this anxiety in general of like, I feel like anyone might feel a little strange sometimes to like advocate for themselves in the medical realm, because they're like, oh, well, the doctor knows best, like kind of that power dynamic. So what advice would you give for anyone who's kind of feeling like timid or something like that because of the power dynamic?
So yeah, like I said before, physicians can be really intimidating because most physicians are very intelligent people who, went to school for a decade, longer than most people go to school. So it's like they know all this information. So it can be kind of weird being like, hey, like I researched this, like I have some questions. But I think most physicians want their patients to play a part in their care plan. Like I know for me, when I'm a doctor, I would love for a patient to be like, hey, I researched this last night. Like, I think I have this, or like, I went over this experimental procedure. Do you think that that's an option for my care plan? I think just being knowledgeable of what's going on in your care and your illness and procedures that you're getting done so that you can have a conversation with your physician. And if you go to a physician and they don't want to have that type of conversation with you, that's not a physician that you want to seek care from. And also, physicians want the best for their patients, just like you want the best for yourself. And people know the best, they know themselves best. So it's good for patients to talk to their physicians about their needs and wants and concerns, because sometimes physicians, you learn all this knowledge over a decade, and there's only so many diseases that you see so often, usually like in internal medicine. And let's say you have a rare disease and you kind of have an idea of what you think it is, but the physician may not even be thinking about that because they have, all these diseases that they have to learn and know about. So if you bring up to a physician like, hey, this is my concern, this is what I think, they might have not have even thought about that.
Definitely. And I also wanted to check into, as you are moving forward, and congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
I wanted to see, did you take like trauma informed care, for example, as a class? Like, is that something that's talked about as you move forward in your medical educational journey, I should say?
So this is like a hard question because I think every school is different. I think more schools are more progressive towards like sexual assault, and knowing that the high rates of, people who are sexually assaulted, that's a large percentage of the patient population that physicians are seeing. So some schools take that seriously. And I do know that now they're incorporating more like social parts of medicine, like how to treat, because I just went on my tour for the med school I'm going to go to. And the girl I was touring with was telling me how they're teaching, there's different, like diseases appear differently in different types of people. So in different races, it's different. In different genders, it comes up differently. Like for women, when you have a cardiology issue, it's different in women than it is in men. So there are classes where they're teaching, the differences in different types of people. And even like treatment of the LGBTQ plus community, which is important because that's a lot of the patient population too. So I think med schools are moving towards treating different types of people. And I don't know if it is 100% they're teaching about trauma informed medicine yet, which I hope. I haven't seen anything about the school I'm going to, so I'm hoping that I can kind of introduce that there. But I think schools are moving more towards that because now, like with the social climate, I think people are realizing that these things are also important in medicine, because you don't just treat, physical issues. It's mental and, spiritual and emotional things too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And it sounds like, you'll be bringing a lot of knowledge in that too. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you like spearheading that. And it just sounds like, I just want to echo kind of like, trust your gut. We understand that, coming from that place, that it is intimidating, and it can be intimidating, I should say, but, trust your gut. You have a right to safety. And then you should just know your boundaries and respect that. And you have a right to self-care. And if at any point you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling uncomfortable, please do your best to like advocate for yourself. You have every right to do that, I should say, no matter who you're working with or speaking with. Kevin, I wanted to also check to see if you had any kind of, if you could speak to, I should say, to the feelings of trust survivors may have towards the justice system.
Yeah, that's a difficult one because from the moment something happens, a lot of people's first instinct is to go to law enforcement. And that, the first patrol officer who comes out to respond to that case could make all of the difference. And unfortunately, especially the patrol officers who aren't necessarily the detectives who have the training, don't know the terminology to use. They don't know the right way to speak to a survivor who's in crisis without re-traumatizing them. So it's pretty often that I'll see a lack of trust and support feeling from law enforcement or criminal justice system. Also because it's not an easy process. We know that the statistics for a guilty verdict in a sexual assault case are abysmally low. And oftentimes the clients that I have that do pursue this, sometimes it's a 1 to 2 year process, waiting, not hearing anything, not sure what's going on. Trial gets pushed back again, trying to negotiate a plea deal with the defending attorney, like all of this constant chaos and unknown and stress, sometimes to make it 2 years to trial, just to then have a not guilty verdict. Or what can almost be worse is a guilty verdict and then 3 months in prison, probation, won't be on the sex offender registry. And it's like, what did I do all this for? Like, what was it worth? And for some people, it is worth a lot. And for those clients who want it, I encourage it. And I'm very honest with them. Like, this is going to be a lot of stress. And at the end of the day, it might not go our way. And so kind of preparing them for that outcome, not to cause distrust, but just to be very aware of what the statistics are for these types of cases and what they're getting into. It can be very stressful and re-traumatizing. And I think that's why a lot of survivors might speak out on their assault in a public platform, or they're open about it, but they won't seek the criminal justice system because it doesn't necessarily traditionally support survivors. I always encourage, like, when possible, to seek paths of restorative justice where healing is more meaningful. How can we define healing and closure outside of the criminal justice system? And I think restorative justice is often that path, but that's also hard because for some authentic restorative justice, the person who committed the sexual assault has to openly admit it to, even if it's just to that person, and said, like, I know what I did was wrong. As per your request, what I'm going to do is, write you a written apology letter acknowledging what I've done. And I'm going to volunteer for this, like, women's health organization to learn more and make amends. It's because restorative justice is, like, per those people. I think that is more effective when it goes well, but it's also hard to get that. But it is becoming more popular, which I think is great.
Yeah, can you actually define restorative justice in case people listening may not know that term?
Yeah, restorative justice is, I want to say it's a new idea, but maybe it's been around for a while. It's where the response to what happened is oftentimes more to, like, the wider community, and there's not a criminal punishment necessarily. So sometimes, like, attorneys or a professional negotiator helps, talk about the terms per se, but
Is it kind of like civil court, going to civil court?
yes, but not even that, because it's not. So, like, restorative justice, and there's different kinds of restorative justice. Like, for one example, I just went to a hate crime symposium last week, and they showed an example as far as race relations with the police community, and all of the people of color and community members gathered at a church, and the law enforcement apologized for a horrendous crime they participated in, like, 25 years before. So that was like a community-wide restorative justice. When it comes to sexual assault, it's a bit more individualized, as far as, like, the person openly admitting, with an agreement that when they say they admit what they did, that the survivor also agrees that, like, they're not going to pursue criminal justice and be like, haha, I got you saying it, it's a trip. It's not like that. It's like the person would admit and acknowledge the wrong that they've done, and work with that family or that survivor to make amends in a way that's more meaningful to the survivor than just going to jail for a few months. So that might be, like, documentation of going to a training class where they learn about consent and sexual assault, and they volunteer for an organization and donate money and time to an organization. Things like that, where it's more, where you can see growth coming out of it rather than meaningless punishment, I guess.
Absolutely. Thank you for defining that and for sharing kind of this other option as well, because I think, as always, this is sexual violence is a crime of power and control, and giving more options for survivors so that they can choose what works best for them is so important. Speaking of which, what alternatives do survivors have if they may not trust, for example, going to the police, and maybe they don't want to go through the justice system at all? What are some other options that survivors have as far as healing and trust?
I mean, I always encourage counseling, and because that's what I do. But, like, at places like Victim Service Center, you can get free counseling and therapy. But I think that's just good because for many of the clients that don't seek criminal justice action, we'll talk about, like, okay, so what does healing mean to you? If you never heard from this person again, never got an apology, they never got punished, how can you still move on? Like, what does that look like? What needs to happen? And I think that is, and it takes a long time to find that answer, because I'll ask it pretty early on, and that's part of the therapy, is finding what the answer to that question is. So I think that is just, whether someone seeks therapy or not, just asking, like, what is it that I do need to heal from this? Like, what's going to make me feel like this no longer has power and control over me, that I've, while symptoms of PTSD or anxiety may linger from time to time, I know that I have not let this, like, pull me out of the life that I want. So as far as like, one option, I think that is an important one just in the healing process. I guess there's practical stuff like you can always collect and preserve the evidence if you're not sure about going to law enforcement. I always encourage, if someone doesn't come to us for immediate help afterwards, like check in with the trusted doctor or gynecologist so that you can get just a quick health exam and some of those more practical things. But of course, my head always goes to like that healing portion and that kind of long-term, piece of how do I move on from this?
I can kind of talk to that because I went through the justice system after my assault, but it didn't work out at all. They found some evidence, but there wasn't, like, they found a hair, but it didn't have DNA on the end. So they couldn't find anything from that. So it was kind of sad that I went through all that work in like a year long of going to the police station and being interviewed, and it just didn't turn out in any way how I wanted it to. So I kind of I was forced into how do I heal when I really wanted the justice system to work out for me. So I was forced into find a different way to heal. So I totally agree with getting counseling, and I did EMDR therapy, and I think that was absolutely amazing. Like anyone that I talk to that has gone through a trauma, I always tell them about EMDR therapy because I think that that's such an amazing tool to use. But I also think for me, getting back into my hobbies helped me heal from, not the justice system not working out for me. Like I love gardening. So seeing plants thrive, even though I may not have been, was amazing for me. And also starting to volunteer. I started volunteering at the VSC several months after it had happened, but helping other people who had been through something similar to me also was helpful. And I posted my story on social media, and having people, message me, and they're like, oh my God, this was so amazing that you did this. It was so healing for me to have people tell me their stories and like us talk about, it made me feel good that they're like, this is amazing. Cause I didn't really think it was a big deal. But then when I had all these people that were like, thank you so much for posting this, it really helped. So I think sharing your story, if the justice system doesn't work out, and going into your hobbies or focusing like on school, cause I did that too with my MCAT, I think can help heal when you go back into things that you like.
I'm so sorry that happened to you as far as the justice system, Molly. And I'm so glad to hear all of these other things that helped you on your healing journey. I know that you do so much for the VSC and for survivors of sexual violence. So I just want to thank you personally for all that you do. And thank you for sharing all of those great things too. I think everyone who's listening, that can be really, really helpful for them. I also wanted to check, kind of shifting gears a little bit, because we've been talking a lot about kind of relationships and dating specifically, which I think can be kind of the obvious route where this conversation can go as far as regaining trust after assault. So can either of you speak to dating after an assault and the role trust can play in that?
I can start. I want to start off by saying dating is terrible for anyone. It's so hard. It doesn't matter if you've been through something or not. It's so hard, but it's especially hard if you've been through an assault. I know for me, after my assault, I was disgusted by men. Like, I don't know. I only love, like, after that, I was like, I only love my dad and my uncle. That's it. Those are the only two guys in this world that I, care about and I think that are great. I was absolutely disgusted. I was like, I don't know how I can go on a date, but there was this guy that I did research with, and he told me something really great because he also suffered from PTSD from an incident he went through. He was shot, so he went through a horrible surgery, and he was afraid to go outside. He developed PTSD afterwards. And he told me, he's like, Molly, I know that this is like hard and terrible and it's scary. He goes, but I regret not like living my life afterwards. He goes, I let it keep me from doing things that I love and like living my life. So just live your life. I know it's hard, but live your life. So I was like, that's really good advice. So I kind of went on I started slow with going on dates or like going out with my friends, maybe to like dinner, and then go with them to a bar, group of friends, whether like a big group of friends, and go to a bar and drink alcohol. Cause my assault happened starting at a bar. I think taking it slow and starting maybe with like going to dinner with your friends and no alcohol, or like going to a bar with your friends and not drinking alcohol. And then maybe going towards going to dinner with someone you're going on a date with, because trusting someone after an assault is very difficult. But I think taking baby steps, but also like the guy I researched with, live your life, because, if you don't live your life. But it's understandable, like after an assault, to be scared to do those things, but it's important to live your life for yourself after an assault and put yourself out there in dating slowly after an assault.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. It can seem so hard because, especially for people who, what if that was the first person they dated and they ruined that experience? That's like 1 out of 1 times is awful. So like, how do you trust that the next time won't be awful? And I think, I don't know, two hard truths is that like you can never 100% know someone's untrustworthy until they do something to betray that trust. So like there's not a perfect litmus test for that. And also that like, the world is no more or less safe before the assault versus after the assault. The only difference is we experience that trauma, but in the grand scheme of the world, not much has changed as far as how many good versus bad people there are out there. Just having the misfortune to run into one. Those don't like always help, but I think sometimes it can put into perspective that idea of like, you have to keep living. You have to keep, if you do want to date, if you want a healthy sex life and dating life and getting married, it's kind of taking that chance. But there are, of course, things you can do, like the safety planning, like when you're going on that date, say, this is the restaurant, tell 3 friends, this is where I'm going. I'm going to share my location with you. If by 10 o'clock, I don't text you that I'm on the way home, call me 3 times. If I don't answer by the 3rd time you call, look at my location, and call the restaurant to see if I'm still there. If my location says I'm there, call the police if I'm somewhere far and away or some apartment building, like building in those small things that can make a big difference. So that I think can help just make a safety net while you learn to trust someone that you may be dating. It's hard. Because even just that idea of like, you have to keep going on. I think of that in the LGBT community, like after Pulse, it would have been easy for none of us to go to a club again, because what if this happens again? Especially because on the news, what we see is all the horrible mass shootings and things like that occur. But at the end of the day, like what everyone said afterwards was keep dancing, Orlando. Like you can't give this bad thing the power that it could have. You have to keep going. So that's when you said that, that's kind of what jumped into my mind, was like, oh yeah, I guess like I do know what that feels like in a sense, because there was trauma and terror of going out again. Like, is it going to be safe? So I think that, those are powerful ideas. Like, yes, this bad thing happened, but it shouldn't stop you from living the life you want.
Yeah. And I think that I want to also uplift, like it's a very normal response to trauma too, to feel this loss of trust or this fear of certain things, and also specific triggers too. So Molly, you kind of talked a little bit about specifically alcohol as a trigger, and then Kevin, you talked about perhaps specifically nightclubs can be a trigger. So I wanted to also ask, what are some other possible triggers as far as like the dating realm or anything like that, that a survivor could perhaps be experiencing? For example, maybe like certain dating apps or something like that.
Yeah, I think dating apps, because you can meet people on dating apps and something happens. So I think dating apps, alcohol, like I said, certain smells too. Like I remember there was a perfume that I wore when it happened, and some of my clothes would smell like it, and it would be like a trigger. Or like different foods or spots. Like if you went to a restaurant before and you went out with your friends and then it happened, that can be a trigger too. Or like physical contact with someone, if they, touch a certain part of your body, or maybe like holding hands or something, can be triggering for survivors too.
Yeah, really, really anything in that way. A lot of triggers are even like a surprise, like you don't know that it is until it happens. I guess being mindful as you learn what those triggers are, but then like as you're starting to date someone, after a few dates, when you're starting to feel comfortable and you know that those triggers may come up, when comfortable, even without disclosing the details as to why it's a trigger just yet, but starting to explain, something happened to me. I went through a traumatic circumstance, and for whatever reason, like this is what stuck. So if you notice it, like it's okay. I just need to do some deep breaths, or it would be helpful if you could distract me by saying something funny, or, just kind of giving those heads up as you get to know friends, family, or someone you're dating.
Yeah, I think that those are really, really helpful tips as far as how we can be just communicating our needs with the people around us as well. And then I think those are really helpful tips for supporters too, because those are kind of questions that they can ask of like, hey, what can I do when that's happening? What do you need space? Do you need me to do something or say something? That kind of thing, which kind of brings me to my next question here, which is, we talk a lot about on this podcast about the barriers survivors face when disclosing a sexual assault to someone. Barriers can, of course, include the fear of not being believed, shame that society puts on survivors. So, what role does trust play in disclosing a sexual assault? And what are some red flags or things that supporters should avoid doing?
Gosh, red flags is hard because I mean, I guess I think of obvious ones, like if you wanted to tell a family member, but when they saw a similar story on the news, they were like, come on, she's making this up. Like, oh, that is, how are you going to disclose to that kind of person? Or like, I think paying attention to like those kinds of hints, like what is their general attitude toward other survivors? If there's any evidence of that, has a friend or family member tried to disclose something like this before to someone and it was met very negatively? Those red flags, I guess, they're hard. I think the people in our lives, we know them well. We kind of have an innate sense of who's going to support us and who's not, just based on that person's personal beliefs. So keeping those things in mind, starting with the people you know are more supportive, and then slowly working your way up to people that you want to disclose to but might not be comfortable to. And then I guess like things that that supporters should avoid doing is asking curious questions like, where were you? Why did this happen? Were you drinking? Like, what was going on that led up to, like, those details they feel important, I think, to a lot of people on the inside. Like, they want to know, they think context will give them an answer as to why it happened, because that's how most questions and answers in life work. Unfortunately, this one doesn't work that way. All of those surrounding details really don't matter. And even as a therapist, like, I have to catch myself working with a client and I'll be like, I want to ask him those things like, oh, well, what was the series of events that night that led up to it? And I'm like, if they don't want to bring it up and talk about it, I'm not going to ask, because it really doesn't matter. The fact is that it happened and now that person needs support. So like, whatever happened leading up to it is really irrelevant. The fact is that someone took advantage of a survivor in a specific situation. And that's the core of what matters. So just keeping that in mind and knowing that those curious questions, those things that you feel like are important to ask, check in, be like, does it really matter if I know this? Will it change the fact that this person experienced a sexual assault? No, it doesn't. So let me just go to the support piece and ask things like, what can I do for you now? How can I support you in this moment?
I think what I found is people who like slut shame are also not someone that you should disclose to, or people who are like, oh my God, look at what they're wearing. Like, she's asking for something bad to happen. People who say things like that, or even people who have like talk bad about people in the sex industry. I think that kind of would set off a red flag to me, that that's someone that I wouldn't want to be disclosing, something about sexual assault to that person.
Definitely. And also, Molly, I wanted to ask you too, if you had anything as far as advice for what supporters should avoid doing if they want to be a supportive person. What are some things that are kind of like these are not helpful and these don't make you seem like a safe person to disclose to?
Yeah, so definitely the victim blaming is terrible. I think slut shaming, like I said, is horrible too. Both red flags that would be for me. But I also think if someone decides to disclose to you, I think just listening, because when you like constantly interrupt someone or like, well, here's my experience, and like, well, I went through this, and they're like trying to one up you with their struggles. It's like, that's not someone, or, that's not something that's going to help someone when they're telling you about something difficult in their life. And then being like super judgmental about decisions that they've made, or I don't know, just that would be something I wouldn't do either. And not doing those things would make it easier for someone who went through something to talk to you about it.
Definitely. I also wanted to ask kind of on the flip side, because you started going into it too, as whoever's listening who might be a supporter of someone in their lives or wants to be that safe person. Whenever a person may feel safe enough to share, for example, what are things that you look for in people where you're like, yep, I trust this person with my story. I know that they will be listening. I know that they will be the safe person to disclose this to. What are some of those green flags, I guess?
Well, one would be, I think, if they have shared their story before. Like, I know for me, when I shared my story on social media, like I had people just messaging me and telling me about their story. So I think, which I think is a good thing for people to do, is to share their own stories, because that definitely opens a door for other people to be like, oh, this is a safe person. This is someone who can relate to me and I can tell them about what I've gone through. I think just being a good listener, when you speak out about like sexual assault or things that are going wrong. Like, I know I post on social media when I see things, like there was a guy, UF, who assaulted a girl, and the judge let him off because he was like, oh, he's such a good student and he has some stuff to do. So I posted on social media, talked about how wrong it was, and I even wrote a letter to the judge. So I think when you are actively fighting against people who support sexual assault or perpetrators, I think that also is a green flag for someone to be like, oh, this person is speaking out against these things. So I think that's someone I could trust to talk to about sexual assault.
Definitely. And also just like little stuff too, I assume, as far as like if someone makes a trivializing comment about sexual assault and they speak up about it, it's like, oh, okay, this person I can trust with my story. I appreciate you sharing that, Molly. Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add as far as like your experience working with clients?
Yeah. And, it's, again, like me seeing multiple clients go through this journey, like it's such a different journey for everyone. But noticing, building that support system, like who are the 3 or 4 people that you've disclosed to that are supportive, that are there for you, that can be like a mirror to bounce things off of, because sure, people bounce things off their counselor. They see me 1 hour a week out of, I don't do math, but there's a lot more hours in a week than that. So having those people that can be your mirror, like, hey, this guy said this, I felt weird about it. Does this bring up a red flag for you guys before I go on a date with them? Letting the trusted people kind of help reflect for you, I think is huge in regaining trust, because it's also doubling down on the trust that you already have with them. And like, yes, there are good people. There are people that support me. There are people that believe me. I mean, even stuff, I've had clients take self-defense classes just to have that confident feeling and raise that self-esteem. This ties into the next question on our list, but that's one thing that's huge, is it's hard to trust others. Sexual assault, one of the hardest parts of ourselves that gets hit after a sexual assault is self-esteem. And if I don't even feel confident and reassured of myself, how am I going to have that in someone else? How am I going to trust them if I am myself not sure of myself? So finding ways to build that self-esteem makes a survivor more assured, like, I know who I am and I know what's okay for me, and that's not. And so that's not a trustworthy person. Like, it makes that process easier. Or like, I know myself and I know this person has my back because I have that esteem and confidence to trust myself with those decisions. So I think that goes like directly hand in hand with the healing and the trust process.
That actually brings me to my other question, really, which is, do survivors ever lose trust with themselves after an assault, for example? Do they ever doubt their perception of the assault and things like that because of victim blaming and people not believing them and things like that?
Yeah, 100%. The gaslighting that can occur, the questioning, the victim blaming, all, because in that moment of crisis, physiologically, our brain isn't functioning in its normal state. It's in fight or flight. Our memory storage device in our brain is put on the back burner. So a lot of times chunks of memories of an assault come back months and months afterwards, which is again, can be an issue of criminal justice because it's like, well, you didn't remember this last time, whole mess. But that's how the brain works. It's like we're in self-defense mode. This functioning part of our brain, don't need it right now, not important. It can be easy for people to gaslight and victim blame because that person is still piecing together what happened in the assault for themselves. One of the final steps sometimes of a therapeutic process from sexual assault is reconstructing the assault, which can be very, very difficult. Like literally writing down, like, this is what I know happened and no one can tell me otherwise because this is my experience. And that's difficult because it involves reliving the experience, but that is a very powerful component of like, this is my story. This is what happened to me. And this is what I know is true, regardless of who questions it, who believes me, who says otherwise. So that reconstruction part is powerful in doubling down on like our story. Again, that goes hand in hand, with the self-esteem. Like when we can be so sure of ourselves, confident, full of esteem, like I know this is what happened and it's unwavering. Like this is my experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for also sharing kind of some tips as well as far as how people can move forward and regain that self-esteem. Molly, did you have anything that you wanted to add as far as, trust within the self? And then also like what has helped you personally in regaining that trust with yourself, with other people, things like that?
Yeah, I definitely lost trust in myself. And I think a lot of other survivors do too, especially for me, because it was a stranger that assaulted me and I never found out who it was. I was always like, the only person I have right now to be mad at or question is myself, because I don't know any details about this person. They're just like a figure that I don't know who they are. So it was like, it made me question myself. Like, what did I do wrong? What made me the target of this person? Like, and I was usually a very safe person. And this was something I never expected to happen to me, but not that just because you're not a safe person that it should happen to you. But I was like, what did I do wrong? Was it, something that I did, something that I said? Was it something that I was wearing that made this person like target me? Also the trust part too, losing trust in yourself. I was studying for my MCAT when I was assaulted. So, and speaking to the self-esteem thing, I had always felt like an intelligent, very hardworking, determined person. And after my assault, I was like, I can't do this. Like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I can take this exam and like focus on, my goals when I'm questioning my own self. And like, so that was a difficult time. But the way that I got over that is my third grade teacher gave me a great piece of advice in life, was to forget the bad and remember the good. And I think of that as people, because when I was assaulted, what helps me get through the thoughts of that was that there were really good people on the worst day of my life. I woke up in a wooded neighborhood and I didn't know where it was. And so I knocked on 3 houses, and on the 3rd house, this very, very kind woman opened her door and let me into her house. And even though I had, bruises and I was dirty and she didn't know who I was, she didn't know why I was at her door. She let me into her house and gave me water and was talking to me and being so kind. And then my landlord later, when I went to my apartment to get a change of clothes, like he didn't even ask me any questions. He just knew something was wrong and gave me a hug. And then later on in the ER, my friends came and brought me my favorite snacks. So I think of those good parts rather than all the bad, because I know that there are bad people in the world. And after you're assaulted, you can get consumed with the fact that there are so many evil people in the world. But like my 3rd grade teacher said, forget the bad, remember the good. So I think of all the good people that were helping me on the worst day of my life. And that's kind of what helped me regain trust with people, because there are good people who will help you.
Thank you so much, Molly, for once again being vulnerable and sharing your story with us. It's so, so powerful. And yeah, wow. Like I was getting chills kind of you talking about, on the 3rd house, I met this person and I bet you it sounds like it was very healing in that moment, especially. And then also kind of feeling the support. I'm hearing a lot going through these podcasts with lots of different people and survivors. I hear a lot of the times where they talk about how important that support system is. And that's why a lot of times when I'm on these podcasts, what I do is I want to frame it from that point of view of like, how can I be a good supporter? How can I be a good supporter? Because it sounds like that's really key in a survivor's healing journey. And of course it's different for everyone. And and things like that. But I'm just hearing that echoing over and over again of kind of like this person helped me, and this is how I got that support that I needed.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's a blessing that I never had anyone like to my face be like, oh, well, you deserve this. Well, what were you wearing? That's the reason why it happened to you. I'm blessed in that I never had anyone say mean things like that. Whenever I told my story, people were always kind. I always had people supporting me. So I think having a support system makes all the difference in anything that you go through in your life that's difficult. It's always a support system that helps you get through things.
Definitely. And what would you say, and this is a question for both of you, of course, what would you say to a survivor who may be struggling and trusting themselves or other people after an assault?
If you're noticing that the trust is not present within yourself, then that's the sign that it's time to do things to address that self-esteem and that confidence and that like love for yourself after an assault. Because to me, that's what that signals. If I can't trust myself, it means that I have an issue with myself. My esteem is not where it needs to be. My confidence level is not where it needs to be. So what can I do to get it to where I want it to be? So that I can feel assured in then how I determine who is and isn't trustworthy in my life, and not have to feel bad about it, not have to question it, not have to be questioned about it. So I think, yeah, for me, that cornerstone of self-esteem and trust is so important in this process. So kind of examining that, because I mean, a lot of people in general, especially the way society raises young women, is not necessarily be full of self-esteem and confidence in the beginning. And then after assault, that only gets worse. So like addressing that piece, I think will do a world of good in knowing how to trust other people.
Absolutely. Molly, do you want to have anything that you like to share?
I have a couple things. I think, first of all, it's important if you're having trouble trusting, I think it's important to find one person, at least someone in your life that you can talk to about and like trust them, whether it's like a therapist, a physician, a family member, a friend, acquaintance, someone that you can talk to. I also think it's important to take things slow and to take care of yourself and be kind to yourself. Because I know for me, I am very hard on myself in every aspect. And then I was especially hard on myself after my assault. And I don't think that it does anything for when you're dealing with hard situations. Being hard on yourself and being mean to yourself does nothing. So I think it's important to take time, even if you're in school or in work. I think, if you can, take a few days for yourself, do self-care, take care of yourself, be kind to yourself. Also, I think it's important to do therapy and to go back into your hobbies and, because like I said, I kind of lost who I was. So I just kind of stepped back and was like, okay, what am I passionate about? Like, I need to put time into what I'm passionate about and like feel like I'm making a difference, whether that was at the VSC or anything, at an art museum, you can volunteer somewhere and feel like you're making a difference. And then, like I said, I think taking it slow, whether it's like, going to dinner with your friends and then going out with a group of friends and then maybe going on a date, just taking things slow and taking care of yourself.
I think that those are such important tips, Molly, especially the hard on yourself. I think that that's really relatable for a lot of people and just kind of, I love what you said, where you said, I don't think that does any good. And then just want to reiterate that I hope that those who are listening know that they're not alone in these feelings, and then also giving yourself the space and the grace to process it. Everyone's healing journey is different and every timeline is different too. And then knowing, when you're ready and working with a therapist to challenge certain things too in a safe space as well. I think that's a wonderful place to kind of sign off. But before I do, just wanted to check if there's anything else you'd like to bring up that we may not have mentioned.
I don't think there's anything on my end.
Yeah, nothing but just to reiterate, like we are our own compass for trust and what that looks like for us. So starting with that trust for ourselves so that we can, navigate that correctly with others, if there's like a takeaway.
No, I think that that's a beautiful thing to share, kind of like we are the compass for trust in ourselves. I love that. So I think that that's a wonderful place to kind of sign off. So I want to thank the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so, so much, Molly and Kevin, for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.